To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. But one evening, as the wife flipped through channels, her heart stopped. On a live reality TV show, she saw her husband caught in the arms of another woman for the world to see. Humiliation turned into fury, and what happened next would leave their neighborhood in shock. This is the story of the wife who shot her cheating husband after his betrayal was exposed on live television. This is True Crimes Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. The Andersons had built a life that many in their neighborhood envied. On Sunday mornings, they walked into church with their children neatly dressed, their smiles wide, their hands intertwined as if nothing in the world could shake them. Friends admired the way they seemed in sync, the way they showed up for every community event, the way they carried themselves with a quiet dignity that others longed to imitate. The wife had become known for her warmth and her ability to keep her household running without a crack showing. She packed lunches with careful detail, remembered every school recital, kept the house spotless, and still managed to look polished when neighbors dropped by unexpectedly. The husband had become a symbol of success, the man others looked to as an example of what hard work could achieve. He provided, he smiled, he charmed. He seemed to embody stability. Their children adored them, their friends praised them, and to the outside world their life looked almost scripted, too perfect to ever falter. But perfection has a way of hiding fractures. The first cracks were invisible, whispers in the fabric of their marriage that could be ignored if you looked away quickly enough. The wife noticed them first, small things that made her heart uneasy. Late nights at the office that stretched longer and longer, explanations that didn't quite add up, laughter on the other end of a phone call that he quickly silenced when she entered the room. She brushed them aside at first. Stress, she told herself. Work was demanding. Maybe he just needed space. She wanted to believe the man she had built her life with couldn't possibly betray her. Still, something in him had changed. He no longer lingered at the breakfast table to ask about her day. He no longer told stories about his own. Conversations that used to flow into the night had become short, clipped exchanges, and the warmth that once wrapped around their marriage seemed to have vanished. She tried to fill the silence with small talk, with questions, with laughter that sounded more like an echo than the real thing. But he drifted further, a little more each day, until she felt like she was living with a stranger. At night, when the children were asleep, she found herself watching him in the glow of his phone screen. His eyes softened as he typed, his lips curved into faint smiles he hadn't given her in months. She asked who it was, and he brushed her off with a laugh, calling her paranoid, saying it was work or friends. The dismissiveness stung more than the lies. He had always been attentive, always eager to talk, but now she felt like she was intruding, like she was trespassing in his world. Her heart told her the truth long before her mind was ready to accept it. The excuses piled up. Late-night meetings that couldn't be explained, weekends away for work trips, sudden detours on his way home that made no sense. She started noticing unfamiliar cologne lingering on his clothes, subtle changes in the way he carried himself. When she asked, he rolled his eyes, irritated, telling her she was imagining things. And still, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to the life they had built, the family that depended on both of them, the image they presented to the world. But pretending became harder with each passing day. She found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold space in the bed beside her. Memories of their early years played in her mind, the laughter, the intimacy, the long talks about the future they wanted to build together. She clung to those memories, hoping they would guide her back to the man she once knew. But reality pressed harder, heavier, until hope felt like a cruel trick. Friends still complimented her at school events. Neighbors still waved when they saw the family walking down the street. To everyone else, nothing had changed. But inside their home, the silence grew louder, the tension heavier. She forced herself to smile in public, forced herself to laugh when people asked how they were doing, forced herself to keep the image intact. Because what else could she do? To admit the truth would be to admit her world was collapsing. And then came the night that shattered the illusion she had been holding on to. The children were in bed, the house was quiet, and she walked into the living room to find him on the phone. He didn't hear her at first. His voice was low, tender in a way she hadn't heard in months. There was a softness, a warmth that used to be hers but was now reserved for someone else. She froze, her body stiff, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might give her away. He laughed, a private laugh that stung like a blade. When he noticed her standing there, his expression shifted. He ended the call quickly, forcing a casual smile onto his face. She asked who it was, her voice trembling despite her best effort to sound calm. His answer was vague, dismissive, the same empty excuses she had been fed for weeks. She wanted to scream, to demand the truth, to shake the lies out of him. But instead she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, choosing silence over confrontation. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the truth pressed against her like a weight she could no longer carry. Something was wrong, something was deeply broken, and no amount of pretending could fix it. The man she thought she knew was slipping away, and the marriage she had built her life around was unraveling thread by thread. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage, and she was trapped in a performance, pretending for the world while her heart broke in the dark. And though she wanted desperately to hold on, to fight for what they had, a part of her knew that the storm was already here, and it was only a matter of time before it destroyed everything. The days after that night dragged on with a heaviness that pressed against every corner of the wife's heart. The suspicion that had once been a whisper was now a constant roar, and though she tried to convince herself to ignore it, the evidence was mounting in ways she could no longer explain away. The husband grew more distant, his time at home shrinking as his excuses grew bolder. He claimed late meetings, long drives to clear his head, friends who suddenly needed him at odd hours. Each explanation was delivered with a calmness that made her feel like she was the one losing her mind. But inside, she knew. She saw the smirk when his phone buzzed, the quick way he turned the screen away from her eyes, the sigh of irritation if she asked too many questions. She wasn't imagining it. Something was happening right in front of her. At first, she kept it inside, swallowing the truth because saying it out loud made it real. But the weight of it was too much, and eventually she confided in a close friend, someone who had always been a quiet source of comfort. Her voice trembled as she explained the late nights, the phone calls, the way he seemed like a stranger in his own home. The friend listened carefully, her expression darkening with each detail, and when the wife finished, she didn't hesitate. "He's cheating," she said flatly, as if the truth had been obvious all along. The wife's stomach twisted. She wanted to argue, to reject the claim, but the silence that followed spoke louder than any words. She already knew it. She just hadn't been ready to hear it said aloud. Once the seed was spoken, it grew rapidly. The small cracks widened until she couldn't ignore them anymore. He left for work trips with less explanation. He returned home smelling of cologne that wasn't his, and his shirt buttons sometimes misaligned as if dressed in haste. She watched him from across the dinner table, his eyes always drifting to his phone, his mind clearly elsewhere. The children asked why Daddy didn't play with them like he used to, why he always seemed too tired or too busy, and each question felt like a knife twisting deeper into her chest. She began noticing how his words changed. Where once he had been tender, now he was dismissive, sharp in ways that stung more than outright cruelty. Arguments sparked easily, over nothing, over everything. She begged him to talk, to tell her what was wrong, but he brushed her off, leaving her with hollow reassurances that carried no weight. And then came the night she couldn't deny it any longer. Curiosity mixed with dread as she decided to follow him. He had said he was working late again, but something in his tone made her restless. She waited until he left, then grabbed her keys, her heart pounding as she drove carefully, headlights low, keeping distance but never losing sight of his car. The streets grew darker as he veered off the usual route home, leading her somewhere unfamiliar. She parked a few blocks away and watched, her breath catching when he stepped out of his car. She wasn't prepared for what she saw. A woman was waiting for him, leaning casually against her car as though she had done it many times before. The husband walked up to her without hesitation, no hesitation at all, and pulled her into his arms. The embrace wasn't friendly, it wasn't innocent. It was the kind of touch that once belonged to the wife, stolen now in the open air as though their vows meant nothing. Her hands shook on the steering wheel, her chest tightening until she thought she might not breathe again. She stayed frozen, watching them laugh, watching the woman's hand linger on his chest, watching him smile in a way she hadn't seen in years. It was undeniable. The truth had ripped through the last shreds of hope she'd been holding on to. She drove home in silence, the world blurring past her as tears streamed down her face. That night, she lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how he could rest so easily while she drowned in heartbreak. She wanted to scream, to confront him with what she had seen, but the words wouldn't form. She was terrified of the answer, terrified of what admitting the truth would do to the fragile pieces of her life. Instead, she kept quiet, her body trembling under the sheets, her mind replaying the image of him with another woman over and over until it carved itself permanently into her soul. Days turned into weeks, and the torment gnawed at her relentlessly. She couldn't eat without feeling sick, couldn't look at him without remembering that night. Every time he left the house, she wondered who he was with, what lies he would tell when he came back. The home that had once been a place of safety felt more like a cage, trapping her in humiliation and heartbreak. Rumors began to circulate quietly. Friends whispered, neighbors watched with knowing eyes. People noticed the way he lingered outside on calls, the way she looked tired and broken, the way their once perfect image no longer fit. They didn't say it directly to her, but she heard enough to know the gossip had begun. The affair wasn't a secret anymore, at least not to those who knew how to look. Her humiliation deepened with every sideways glance, every forced smile at community gatherings where people whispered the moment she turned away. She avoided eye contact, ashamed, though she knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Its shame doesn't care about logic. It seeped into her bones, making her feel smaller every day. Inside, a storm was building. Grief, anger, betrayal, humiliation, they swirled inside her until she could no longer separate one from the other. She wanted answers, she wanted honesty, but more than anything, she wanted her life back. The family she had worked so hard to protect was slipping through her fingers, and no matter how tightly she tried to hold on, everything was unraveling. And deep down, she knew the worst part was still coming. The storm that had been building finally broke in the most unexpected way. One evening, after another day of forced smiles and hollow conversations, the wife sat in the living room flipping through channels absent-mindedly. The children were asleep upstairs, the house was quiet, and she just wanted a distraction from the ache that never seemed to leave her chest. Her finger stopped on a channel she had never paid much attention to before, a reality show that thrived on secrets and drama. People went on stage and had their personal lives exposed, the kind of spectacle she usually found distasteful, but something about it held her that night. She leaned forward, her eyes on the screen, her breath shallow as the cameras cut to a man walking across the stage. Her blood froze. It was him, her husband. There he was under the blinding lights, sitting across from a host who wasted no time pulling him into uncomfortable questions. The wife's pulse hammered in her ears. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. At first, she thought maybe she was wrong, maybe the man only looked like him. But as the camera zoomed in, there was no denying it. His face, his voice, the way he adjusted his jacket, it was him. And then the unthinkable unfolded before her eyes. The host asked about his life, about his family, about where his heart really belonged. And the wife watched, horrified, as another woman was introduced. The cameras panned to her, the audience gasped, and her husband smiled in a way that made her stomach twist. The world seemed to tilt. There he was, caught in the act for millions to see, leaning toward the woman, touching her hand, laughing as if the wife at home didn't exist at all. It wasn't a rumor, it wasn't suspicion, it wasn't something she could deny anymore. It was happening, live, playing out in front of strangers and flashing across television screens for anyone to witness. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes wide, tears blurring her vision as the scene continued. The other woman looked comfortable, familiar with him, and the audience fed on the drama, their reactions growing louder with every exchange. But for the wife sitting alone in her living room, it wasn't entertainment, it was the complete destruction of her life. By the time the segment ended, she was shaking uncontrollably. Rage, humiliation, heartbreak, they all surged inside her at once. Her marriage had just been reduced to a spectacle for strangers to gossip over. Her pain had become public property. and the man she had given everything to had smiled through it all, as if the vows they once spoke were nothing but a distant memory. In the days that followed, she couldn't escape it. Clips of the episode spread across social media, shared and replayed with mocking captions and endless commentary. People she barely knew reached out with pity or judgment. Friends whispered behind her back, neighbors stared when she left the house, and the story became the talk of the community. Her humiliation was complete. She could hardly leave her own home without feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes. But the worst part was still him, her husband. When he returned home, he acted as though nothing had happened, brushing off her questions with cold dismissals, pretending the show was nothing more than a misunderstanding. He minimized it, laughed it off, shifted the blame to her for being too sensitive. Each word was another dagger, another way of telling her that her pain didn't matter, that her heartbreak was hers to bear alone. She couldn't understand it. How could he look her in the eye after doing what he had done on national television? How could he smile at her children when he had torn their family apart in front of the world? The betrayal was unbearable. And no matter how much she tried to steady herself, the rage inside her grew darker with each passing day. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was still seeing the other woman, and now the whole world knew it. And for the wife, there was no escaping the humiliation. Every glance, every whisper, every shared video reminded her of the night her life was destroyed in front of millions. And with each reminder, she felt herself moving closer to the edge of something she couldn't come back from. The weeks after the television broadcast dragged the wife into a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Everywhere she turned, she felt the sting of humiliation. At the grocery store, women whispered in hushed voices when she passed. At school events, parents she once considered friends avoided her eyes, pretending not to stare while her children performed on stage. Even the neighbors who had once praised her family's unity now offered tight, pitying smiles, as though she were a tragic character in a story they were grateful wasn't theirs. The wife tried to keep her head high, to move through her days with dignity, but the truth followed her like a shadow. She couldn't escape it, not in the streets, not on her phone, not even in her own home. Social media was flooded with clips of her husband sitting under the studio lights, the other woman at his side. People had dissected every second of it, drawing their own conclusions, leaving comments that burned like salt in her wounds. Some mocked her for not seeing it sooner. Others sympathized, but their pity felt like another knife to her pride. And still, through all of it, the husband carried himself as if nothing had changed. He came and went as he pleased, answering her questions with sarcasm, turning her pain into a joke. He told her she was overreacting, that the show had blown things out of proportion, that she should stop being dramatic. But she had seen him with her own eyes, seen the way he looked at that woman, seen the way his hand lingered, his smile stretched wider than it had for her in years. It was no mistake. It was no exaggeration. It was betrayal, undeniable and public. Nights grew colder in their home. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside her, wondering how he could sleep so easily while she drowned in rage. He was still texting her, she knew it. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, his lips curled into that same soft smile, his eyes glinting with a tenderness that no longer belonged to her. The phone buzzed late into the night, and he slipped from the bed under the excuse of needing water or checking on something downstairs. She knew where he was going. She knew what he was doing. And still, he looked at her in the mornings as if she were crazy for suggesting otherwise. Their children, innocent and unaware of the full weight of the truth, began to sense the change. They asked why Mommy and Daddy no longer laughed together, why dinner was so quiet, why Daddy was always leaving. The questions cut deeper than any words he had spoken, because she had no answers to give. How could she explain to them that the man they loved had chosen someone else, that their family had been shattered on a stage for strangers to applaud? She forced smiles, forced reassurances, but her heart ached each time she looked at them, knowing their world was crumbling no matter how hard she tried to hold it together. Her friend, the one she had confided in before, urged her to confront him, to demand answers, but every attempt only pushed him further away. He grew colder, angrier, snapping at her for prying into his life, accusing her of making him miserable with her constant questions. She felt trapped, cornered in her own home, stripped of the respect she had once been shown. The man who had once been her partner, her confidant, had turned into a stranger who mocked her pain and treated her heartbreak like an inconvenience. As the days passed, she began to realize that he wasn't just unfaithful, he was unrepentant. He didn't want to save the marriage. He didn't want to fight for their family. He wanted her silence, her compliance, her acceptance of a reality where he could betray her openly and still return to the comfort of their home. That realization broke something inside her. The humiliation she had endured from strangers was unbearable, but the indifference in his eyes when he looked at her was worse. It told her everything she needed to know. To him, she was no longer a wife, no longer a partner. She was just a shadow of the life he was leaving behind. Each day she carried the weight of that truth, and each day the storm inside her grew stronger. The pain had become something darker now, a simmering anger that refused to be silenced. And though she tried to bury it, to smother it with duty and distraction, she could feel it rising, consuming her, pushing her toward a breaking point she feared but could no longer avoid. The night of the confrontation felt heavier than any other. The wife's mind had been replaying the same image for weeks, her husband on stage, smiling beside another woman, their hands brushing under the studio lights while millions of people watched. It wasn't gossip, it wasn't suspicion, it had been broadcast for the world to see. And yet, even after all of that, he still came home to her as though nothing had happened. That night he returned late again, the faint scent of perfume clinging to his shirt, his tie loosened, his steps careless. She stood waiting in the living room, her arms folded, her heart pounding. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice steady though her hands trembled. He smirked, tossing his keys on the table. "Out. Why does it matter?" She stepped closer, her eyes burning. "It matters because I watched you with her. On live television. Everyone saw it. Our neighbors, our friends, our children will grow up knowing their father betrayed their mother on national TV. And you walk in here like nothing happened." He chuckled, a sharp, cruel sound that cut deeper than a blade. "You're too dramatic. That show exaggerated everything. People eat it up. You think anyone really cares? They'll move on." "I care," she snapped, her voice cracking. "You humiliated me. You broke this family. You threw away everything we built for a cheap thrill, and you did it in front of the world." He shook his head, his smile mocking. "You always play the victim. Maybe if you weren't so suffocating, I wouldn't have needed someone else. She makes me feel alive. You just nag and whine. That's all you do anymore." Her body trembled, her vision blurring with tears and rage. "So that's it? After everything, after our children, our vows, I'm just nothing to you now?" He shrugged, stepping past her toward the kitchen. "Pretty much." The words struck like a hammer, shattering what little control she had left. Her eyes fell to the drawer where the gun lay hidden, the weapon she had bought in her darkest moment, telling herself it was only for protection. Her hands moved before her mind could stop them, pulling it free, her grip unsteady but firm enough. "Don't you walk away from me," she whispered, her voice shaking. He turned, his eyes widening slightly before narrowing again, the smirk returning. "What are you going to do with that? You think you scare me? Put it down before you make a fool of yourself." "You already made me a fool," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You did that when you held her hand on that stage, when you smiled at her the way you used to smile at me. You destroyed me." He stepped closer, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You won't do it. You don't have it in you. You'll keep crying, keep nagging, but you'll never." The words cut off as her finger tightened on the trigger, the sound of the gunshot exploding through the house like thunder. He staggered, shock flickering across his face as he fell to the floor, his body collapsing in a heap. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by her ragged breathing and the ringing in her ears. She dropped the gun, staring at her trembling hands, unable to process what she had just done. Neighbors who heard the shot called 911, and soon the flashing lights painted the street outside in red and blue. Officers burst through the door, finding her frozen near his body, her eyes wide and empty. She was led away in handcuffs, her wrists bound, her world collapsing around her. The trial that followed was a media storm. Clips of the reality show were replayed endlessly, anchors discussing how the wife had discovered her husband's betrayal not in whispers or rumors, but on live television for millions to see. Prosecutors painted her as a jealous woman consumed by rage, while her defense argued she had been pushed beyond human limits, humiliated and abandoned until she snapped. But no verdict could undo what had been done. A family was destroyed, children left without their parents, and a community shaken by the story that had begun as a spectacle on TV and ended in blood on the living room floor. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories, and tell us where in the world you are watching from.